Hello and welcome to In Parliament. The government is studying the need to have more victim-centric measures to aid victims of trafficking in their recovery. Senior Minister of State for Home Affairs, Masagos Zulkifli, provided an update in Parliament on the findings of the Interagency Task Force on Trafficking in Persons. He said that since the task force was set up in 2010, it has made substantial progress. It has also been actively reviewing domestic legislation to ensure they are relevant and effective for combating trafficking offences. Mr. Masagos said that while Singapore has provisions in various laws to criminalise trafficking acts, the review has confirmed the need for a dedicated law to combat trafficking, which will bring several benefits.
First, it allows us to put in place a consistent and forward-looking framework to deal with all types of TIP offences. Second, we equip agencies with the necessary levers to deal with the different modus operandi of TIP criminal groups. Third, this would clearly reflect Singapore's commitment to fight TIP to the global community and align us to international standards.
Mr. Masagos was replying to a question posed by Holland Bukit Timah GRC MP Christopher D'Souza, who introduced a private member's bill on this issue. Mr. Masagos pledged to support the bill and said the Interagency Task Force on Trafficking in Persons will work out the specifics of the bill with Mr. D'Souza. Private members' bills are introduced by MPs who are not ministers. In this case, the Ministry of Home Affairs has agreed to allow Mr. D'Souza to introduce the bill, which he says will allow him to better understand what legal powers and tools officers on the ground need to deter human traffickers.
I believe there should be zero tolerance for human trafficking, especially the trafficking of minors. What is needed is a dedicated piece of legislation to criminalize the trafficking of persons and minors for the purpose of sexual exploitation, forced incarceration, slave labor, and forced organ trafficking. Such legislation will enhance Singapore's arsenal to combat trafficking in and through Singapore.
Disabled persons and low-income workers will soon enjoy new fare concessions funded by the government. Transport Minister Louis Tak Yew announced this in Parliament today and estimated that about 500,000 Singaporeans will be eligible for the new schemes. Mr. Louis said more time is needed to work out the details, including who can apply, how to apply, and the exact concession rates. But details should be out by the next fare adjustment.
We are committed to further strengthening our social safety net on the public transport front. The two new concession schemes for LIWs and PWDs go beyond giving these two groups of Singaporeans ad hoc assistance through public transport vouchers. We have not yet decided on the exact amount of discounts to give to these two groups. However, it is my intention to ensure that the discounts given will more than offset any fare increase in the next fare exercise.
The new concessions are part of a list of recommendations made by the Fare Review Mechanism Committee to address fare affordability, which the government has accepted in full. The other recommendations include the proposal to smoothen fare increases by rolling over part of the fare increases to the following year. Mr. Louis also said he will urge the Public Transport Council to ensure that fare increases for the next round of adjustment would not exceed the average wage increase for 2013. Overall, Mr. Louis called the report fair and reasonable and said the newer framework will ensure public transport fares remain affordable for all.
Let me give you this assurance that while fares are likely to have to go up in the coming years, they will not become less affordable for the average commuter, and in fact will be considerably more affordable for the low-income and the disadvantaged groups. This is my intention, and I have every confidence that we can achieve it.
MP for Pioneer Cedric Foo raised the issue of affordability. He wanted to know where the money would come from in providing the subsidies.
What are the thinking behind certain schemes being borne by the government and certain being cross-subsidized by the full fare commuters? And because some of the concession schemes are subsidized by full fare commuters,
I think the FRMC realized that if all this were to be cross-subsidized by full fare paying commuters, that it would be a heavy burden. The government has accepted that the government be responsible for the new concession schemes. I think at the same time, the FRMC was also mindful that if all the concession schemes, including the existing ones, were to be borne by the government, that there would be the lack of that tension in the system, so to speak. And so they retain the existing mechanism where enhancements to existing schemes would be borne by the rest of the commuters. So I think there's a certain tension and a certain balance that they are trying to achieve.
Most commuters do associate service quality with their willingness to pay higher fares. The minister has said that it's because the government does not want to have differentiated fares between different operators. But my question is, why not? And how difficult is it to implement differentiated fares between different operators? In fact, that would actually spur the operators to do better on the service quality standpoint.
One thing you want to try and do is to keep it as straightforward as possible. And I think the FRMC had that in mind, to not want to complicate the fare formula unnecessarily. I think if you do want to include a service quality component into the fare formula, then I suspect that the PTOs would also say, well, what about the cost increases that are associated with any service quality improvements?
Minister for Social and Family Development Chan Chun-Sing has assured MPs that Singapore has a system in place that will help anyone in need, even if they do not meet the criteria. Answering various questions on the help schemes that are available to needy Singaporeans, Mr. Chan said the government's strategy is to have multiple lines of assistance to help Singaporeans with differing needs.
These range from broad-based subsidies that benefit many to targeted assistance for smaller groups who need additional help. The eligibility criteria vary depending on the target group of beneficiaries and the purpose of assistance.
Last year, more than 1,500 households who did not meet the income criteria were helped under ComCare, which provides both short and longer-term help to families in need. Mr. Chan said the government's priority is to make sure there is enough resources to fund the country's social assistance programs and to ensure that policies are sustainable. And this means making sure help gets to those who need it most.
We should not be in a situation whereby, because of politics, the middle income group end up getting the bulk of it and we neglect the lowest income group. We should have a system where it is broadly where we are now, whereby the lowest income will always get the most and then we slowly cascade down, while those with the most will also be willing to share more of what they have.
I'd like to understand a bit more about the criteria for the $550 per capita income or $1,700 household income cap for the ComCare. I'd like to know if this is based on any research or international norms, or is this a definition by MSF about the minimum living income? And I'd like to also know how and when MSF would consider adjustments to these lines that are being set.
Let me explain that ComCare provides short and medium-term assistance to the families in need to supplement the other sources of help that they might have. It is not a uniform scheme whereby everybody gets a fixed amount. The amount that is given out to the respective families actually take into account various factors like I've explained, the family sizes, their other sources of income, their particular needs in, for example, medical and so forth. So the criteria that we set here for the per capita income of about 500 for the PCI, about 1,007 for the family, those are guidelines that we use because these are generally lines whereby from our experience, whereby people coming to seek for help are in this range here. And of course, we will regularly review the criteria as we have done so in the recent years.
I note that there are many of these schemes available, but there's a perception that these schemes are not accessible. So how can we improve the accessibility? Because for many of these low-wage workers, they typically daily rated, they may not have the documentation, or some may also find it a hassle to go to CDC or SSOs because of the nature of their job work.
Indeed, we need to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to mobilize the volunteers and grassroots community leaders to come and help spread the message. For example, recently we have set up the chain of social service offices across the entire island. We will have 10 by the end of this year and hopefully 20 by the end of next year. These are all avenues to help improve and increase the number of access points that the needy families can get help. We are also expanding the network of family service centers from the previous about 40 to now we have more than 40, so that families in need also can access help. The person applying for assistance should not be required to understand the complexity of the scheme. If they need help, they should be able to approach someone who understands the scheme, and it is up to us who are providing the help to find out which is the most appropriate scheme and package the scheme to help the person in need. So that we do this at the back end, but from the front end, the person who needs help will just need to let the social worker or the social work professionals know the kind of situation that they are in.
Communications and Information Minister Dr. Yaacob Ibrahim says an audit framework for mobile networks will be implemented by the second half of next year. It is currently in discussion with mobile operators on the scope of the audit. This could cover network design, technical processes, business continuity planning, and infrastructure and facilities to support the mobile network. The move follows a review of the resiliency of all three telcos after M1 suffered a major mobile telephone outage in January. While the review found that the three mobile operators' networks met international standards, other improvements are also being considered.
For example, international experts indicated that no country has required its operators to build a full geo-redundant mobile network at the core level. This is where an operator puts in place at least two sets of replicated network equipment housed at different geographical locations, so that in the event that one location is brought down, the other location is capable of immediately taking over the full load and capacity. This is an option that IDA is currently considering.
As for the fire that broke out at Singtel's Bukit Panjang exchange facility last month, Dr. Yaacob said the government plans to wait for the outcome of the Infocom Development Authority's investigations before reviewing if further policy measures are necessary. This includes a similar audit framework for other networks. In the meantime, Dr. Yaacob said certain works have also been suspended pending a full review of various procedures.
Getting the most optimal level of resiliency means making the right investments in diversity, resistance, redundancy, and recovery. Focusing on diversity alone does not make the network more resilient. For example, if an operator built a duplicate network but did not invest in adequate facilities to recover from an outage, it would end up with two networks that are not resilient.
Dr. Yaacob also reiterated that the proposed sale of OpenNet to a business trust owned by Singtel is not related to the fire at the Bukit Panjang exchange. The consolidation application had come under scrutiny, as some had said the move would see Singtel becoming the sole beneficial owner of the only other nationwide fixed telecommunications network in Singapore, apart from Singtel's own network. The deal requires regulatory approval from IDA, and Dr. Yaacob said IDA had correctly stated that ownership should not be confused with diversity. He said feedback concerning the consolidation application is being reviewed, and IDA will be able to issue a decision soon.
The Telecom Competition Code requires that IDA, when assessing consolidation applications, to take into account all factors in accordance with the standards spelled out on the code. And this includes ensuring that the proposed consolidation does not result in a substantial lessening of competition in any telecommunication market in Singapore or harm the public interest. In its review, IDA will take into account the feedback received from the public consultation exercise, including the submission from the industry coalition.
Several bills were passed in Parliament today. The Criminal Law Temporary Provisions Act has been renewed for another 5 years, the 13th time since its introduction in 1955. The Act allows the government to detain serious criminals without trial and has been used to deal with organised crime, drug trafficking and loan shark syndicates. Most MPs supported the bill, drawing examples from Malaysia to demonstrate the importance of keeping criminals at bay.
Malaysia's Home Minister attributed the rise in lawlessness to the release of more than 2,500 what he described as hardened criminals who were previously detained under the emergency ordinance. Just last month, the Malaysian government has tried to reintroduce measures for detention without trial in new form with new measures. But the basic principle is that they have found it necessary to reintroduce these measures to bring the crime situation under control.
However, others questioned safeguards that govern the bill as well as challenges of maintaining public support for the tough laws.
Younger Singaporeans who have grown up in a relatively safe environment here may find it hard to comprehend why such a tough law is needed. This is particularly so when there are other countries that have managed to keep serious crime at bay without the CLTPA equivalent in their statute books.
It is important for MHA to share the CLTPA, how CLTPA is applied by revealing the profile of the detainees and how the cases are reviewed objectively by the advisory committee to alleviate the fear of abuse by the law enforcement agency.
Parliament also passed amendments to the Goods and Services Tax Bill. Among the changes, the enforcement powers of the Comptroller have been strengthened to enable him to carry out more thorough investigations and effectively prosecute persons who have made fraudulent claims. The scope of taxpayer information disclosure will also be refined. Now, the amended bill also has the money laundering of proceeds of serious tax crimes as a criminal offence and gives the taxman the power to deduct tax arrears from government payments to taxpayers. For instance, IRAs can deduct payments given to businesses under the wage credit scheme. Now, Parliament has passed amendments to the Motor Vehicles Third-Party Risks and Compensation Bill. The public trustees' role in reviewing adequacy of out-of-court compensation settlements may no longer be relevant or necessary where motor accident victims are represented by lawyers. Senior Minister of State for Law Indrani Raja says the changes to the bill seeks to balance changing socio-economic realities with the original rationale for this function of the public trustees. She also said that the percentage of unrepresented victims is also relatively low today.
In 2008, 23% of 2,798 compensation cases were out-of-court settlements. By 2012, only 16% of the 3,221 compensation cases were out-of-court settlements. In the same 5-year period, the percentage of unrepresented motor accident victims per year hovered between 1% and 2%. Victims who cannot afford legal representation can also obtain assistance from the Legal Aid Bureau if they pass the means test.
The current situation of having the public trustee as the gatekeeper of compensation adequacy has always added a layer of comfort and protection for such accident victims. From the lawyer's standpoint too, there is an advantage. Retaining the public trustee's approval on settlement sums protects lawyers from unjustified complaints that their claimants were shortchanged. With the amendments in this bill, are we not compromising on these aspects? Does the ministry intend to put in place any safeguards to minimize the risk of non-payment or delayed payment?
We arrived at this conclusion after taking industry feedback, and it was felt that the way the amendments were done would be sufficient to take care of the adequacy of the compensation. We do not think it's necessary for these reasons. With respect to those who are unrepresented, then there is no change. So the public trustee will continue to perform that oversight role, and if the amount of the compensation has been determined and is not forthcoming, the public trustee will chase in the normal way. For those who are represented, the victim still does have the protection of the lawyer because it is actually part of the lawyer's duty to then chase and to ask for the payment.
A bill to make changes to the Road Traffic Act was also passed. Among the key changes, to implement the conditional growth criteria for taxi companies. Under the proposed amendments, LTA will be able to determine the maximum number of new licenses given for each taxi company based on its performance. It also allows taxi companies to make written representations for LTA's consideration when making its decision.
We need to find the right balance between the interests of taxi commuters, taxi drivers and taxi companies. The taxi availability framework aims to increase the utilization of our taxis so that commuters find it easier to hail a taxi on the road. I know that taxi drivers are trying hard to provide the level of service and availability that commuters want. And on the part of the taxi companies, I again urge them to work with and help their drivers achieve the service and availability standards and not expect the drivers to achieve them all on their own.
Now, before Parliament adjourned, an adjournment motion was filed. MP for Ang Mo Kio GRC, Dr. Intan Azura Mokhtar, spoke out on social assistance and affordability for Singaporeans. Some of her suggestions included improving accessibility to assistance, ensuring affordability for Singaporeans, and greater flexibility in assessing the merits of each case, applying for assistance, and use of one's social security savings. She added better coordination among the government and other agencies will also better help those in need.
To the rising cost of living and inflation in the prices of food, housing and transportation, affordability remains a challenge for the low-income earners whose salaries have not quite increased in tandem with the increase in prices, and for the elderly whose current savings from years of toil and sweat have not quite amounted to much in relation to today's prices of goods. Hence, there is still room for more to be done to help them.
In response, Minister for Social and Family Development Chan Chun-Sing said the government is committed to doing as much as it can, but this can only be done through the help of the community. Mr. Chan said on the issue of flexibility, training for frontline officers needs to be strengthened to give them the confidence to make a decision. He also noted coordination across agencies can be much better and added more is being done.
While we do not start from a very negative position, we know our challenges, and our challenges will continue to grow going forward. This government is committed to do as much as we can in partnership with the community and like-minded individuals to take care of our elderly, our vulnerables, and to give Singaporeans that sense of assurance that they can age and grow old in their community with dignity. We will try to do our best to master the resources. It is not easy because going forward, our challenges will grow. Our demographics and our aging population might restrict our ability to fund many of these things, and this is where we must really make sure that we target our assistance to those who really, really need it.
Parliament resumes tomorrow. Join me then for more highlights from the chamber. Good night.